Before I could make the transformation to retired BatDad, I first had to select a mask or cowl that would give him an older, more retro look. I superimposed several mask types onto my face in Photoshop to help me decide. I chose the '89 Michael Keaton Bat Cowl since 1. It has a great retro look, and 2. The overall appearance seemed to fit my face better. I ordered a fairly inexpensive latex mask online for less than $30, and this is what it looked like when it arrived. Yikes! Most latex masks are made overseas, thrown into a pile, and then crammed into a plastic bag. From there, they lay in storage for months before shipping out in sealed, very hot containers where they lay in storage for several more months, possibly years. The tag on my mask indicated that it was manufactured 2 years ago. Fortunately, latex masks can be restored with some fairly basic supplies, a heat gun, and a lot of patience. Here are the materials I used. The styrofoam wig head, approximately 2 square feet of half-inch semi-flexible styrofoam, a paint stirring stick, a lady's nylon stocking, scissors, a tape measure, heat gun, marking pen, a large diameter plastic tube, and some 3M general purpose 45 spray. That's not an endorsement, it's just what worked best out of the several adhesives I tried. I also discovered during the repair that an X-Acto knife, some string, smaller scissors, and various small rods made of wood or plastic were helpful as well. The first thing I needed to do was create a mock-up that had my general head shape. I apologize, it did not occur to me to film this process until the head mock-up was complete. Sorry about that. I'll be showing some techniques later in this video that might help viewers better understand how that process worked. In general, you want to cut several pieces of the semi-flexible styrofoam shown by the red lines and glue them to the wig head. You may want to use a thinner semi-flex styrofoam depending on your head size. I measured the circumference of my head and divided by pi to determine the diameter of my head. I needed to add 1 inch in overall diameter, so half-inch semi-flex styrofoam worked for me. I also added some smaller pieces at the side of each crown, shown by the blue lines, where the bat ears start upward to help keep the mask from sagging at those spots when I applied heat. I made a stand for the head out of a piece of 3/4 inch PVC pipe with a base made from an old oscillating fan. I then covered the head with a nylon stocking so that I could get the mask on and off more easily. Mount your mask on the head mock-up and start by wiping it down with a water-dampened, lint-free rag to remove any dust or molding release powders. Next, check for any major problem areas that will need to be addressed. For this mask, the face, chin opening, crown, ears, and the shoulder pieces need a lot of attention. Also, be sure to close any openings on the mask. This particular cowl has a Velcro closure in the back that allows you to get your head inside without having to overstretch the mask or use baby powder. Powders are fine as long as you don't mind walking around with powder all over your head and mask, plus smelling like a baby's butt. I decided to start at the bottom of the cowl for a couple of reasons. A, if I made a mistake, it wouldn't be as bad as making one on the facial area, and 2, it just seemed to make more sense to work from the bottom up. I made a shoulder shaping tool from a large diameter plastic tube wrapped in semi-rigid styrofoam, secured in place with a couple of rubber bands. This is a 1400 watt heat gun, and you want to make sure that you use the low setting for heating the mask. Do not use the high setting. A hairdryer works for small areas, but the thermal protection will trip before you can get a large area heated very well. So I recommend a good quality heat gun. Caution, just be careful when using a heat gun. Use various shaping tools to manipulate the rubber back into shape. Handling heated latex with your hands or fingers can cause burns. On the low setting, begin to heat the area that you want to work on. Fortunately, latex masks are molded and have a tendency to reassume their factory-formed shape when heated. They just need a little help. You can tell an area is getting warm enough to reshape when it begins to soften and becomes more pliable. Obviously, you can control the amount of heat applied to an area by moving the heat gun closer or farther away. The main thing to remember after shaping an area on the mask is to allow it to cool before removing your shaping tool. Otherwise, the area won't hold the shape you're trying to restore. This is where the patience part comes in. I started on the shoulder piece with the least amount of distortion so that I could practice my technique. Now, onto the bad side. I'll start with the worst wrinkle first. Remember, patience is the key. Be sure to avoid overheating any particular area. Now onto the front chest area. I'll use the same shaping tool that I used on the shoulders to round the front into a more natural shape. As I was working the front, I noticed that the chin area was starting to soften a bit, so I decided to start working some of the folds out of that area as well. Now that I've got my technique and heat control down, it's time to move on to the facial area. Because the work areas are smaller, I'll use smaller wood and plastic shaping tools in this region. I use the flat paint stirring stick to reshape the nose into the classic Batman form. And, of course, wait while the rubber cools. Next, I reshape the areas under the nose piece. Before starting on the eye openings, I noticed that there was a small amount of excess rubber that had oozed out during the molding process. I tried the mask on and didn't like how that looked or felt, so I decided to trim that off before continuing. Small scissors work really well for this, but patience and caution are the key. Make sure that the scissors are sharp and that you are confident of each cut before removing any material from a mask. Using moderate heat and my smaller tools, I slowly reshape the facial area to restore its natural form. Next, onto the crown area. If your head mock-up is smooth across the top and fits the mask well, you can pull the mask down as you are heating it to help push any divots or wrinkles out. Apply heat and use your shaping tools as necessary to reform the area back into its natural shape. Use caution in and around areas that have natural molding shapes, such as the sides of this mask. Too much heat can begin to distort those areas if you're not careful. Now, onto one of the most critical areas of a bat cowl, the ears. These have to be right or the mask just looks dorky, and I don't need any help with that. This is where I'll show you a little bit about using semi-flex styrofoam to create shapes. I first trace the ear shape onto the styrofoam. The ear shape extends down onto the sides of the crown, so when I cut the earpiece out, I'll simply make it taller to take that into account. I used an X-Acto knife to cut the styrofoam. Use a cutting board or tempered glass as shown when cutting these shapes to protect surfaces and to avoid dulling your knife blade. The ears are obviously thicker and wider at the bottom than they are at the top, so I'll cut 2 pieces per ear, glue them together, and trim the pieces to fit. Once I had the general form, I had to trim the pieces to more closely match the actual shape of the ear. I used scissors to cut the corners off from bottom, thick, to top, thin. Trim the 4 corners of each piece, cutting shallow to deep as shown. Continue trimming lightly until you get the overall shape to match the ears. Push the pieces into the ears and mount the mask onto your head mock-up. Pull the mask down snug to position everything properly. Carefully begin to apply heat. As I was working through this process, I noticed that the ears had a tendency to droop outward. So I made a loop out of nylon string and placed it over the ear tips to make sure they pointed upward. This makes the cooling process less difficult since the string will actually hold the ears in place while the latex cools. After I had the mask generally restored, I repeated all the reshaping steps shown in this video just to help fine-tune all the areas. This didn't take very long and I was really glad I did it. After you're done, you can either leave the foam earpieces in place or remove them. I removed them from my cowl. Once the job was complete, I decided I needed a proper stand in order to store the mask and to help keep its shape. I purchased a very inexpensive plastic mannequin head online. They're hollow and light, so I made a simple base out of 3/4 inch MDF covered in subwoofer cabinet material in order to hold the mannequin steady as I pulled the mask on and off. There are plenty of videos on YouTube that show how to make and cover an MDF box. I cut an opening in the base with a keyhole saw, drilled 2 3/8 inch holes, and bolted the base onto the mannequin head using 1/4 inch bolts and large fender washers. Hint: I cut and drilled the holes before I covered the base with cloth. Once the mask was complete, I decided that it had a bit too much shine for close-up camera work, so I decided to dull that down with some Cowl water-based clear latex finish spray. Again, this is not an endorsement, it's just what worked best for me. Be sure to use the water-based version. Anything else will simply dry and crack. I sprayed several coats from a distance of about 12 to 14 inches. It takes about 10 to 15 minutes to dry between coats, depending on humidity, with low humidity being best, of course. Once again, be patient. If the spray is too close or does not dry between coats, you're simply wasting your time and the mask will still look shiny. Apply as many coats as necessary to get the level of matte finish that you want. And ta-da! Retired BatDad is ready to spring into action.
Alfred! Help me! I've fallen and I can't get up!